For this next video, what I want to do with our Go blog is add a page that shows all of the blog posts that we have. And to do this, we're going to do a little bit of refactoring. Right now we have everything just in the root directory. All our code is inside of main.go. And I could make this work completely fine. But I know that like long term, I'm probably going to move these blog posts into their own directory. I'm probably going to want to have a couple different commands potentially that I'm running. I'm going to move my main.go into its own little spot and then start setting up my code so that it's more easily testable and it's sort of separated from that main. And a lot of this is just sort of what I do every time I build an application. I just didn't do it from the get-go here. So let's do that refactoring first, and then I will dive into actually adding this functionality to the application. So the first is going to be setting it up so that we have a separate command to run that we can build our application and run our server with. So I'm going to go ahead and make dir-p command /server. So this will create the command and then the server directory inside of it. And then I'm going to code command server.go. I always tend to name my my main.go files inside of the command or structure the same as the folder that I'm using. So in this case, it's inside server, so I'll name it server. If I recall correctly, I started doing it because whenever you run go build, it automatically names the binary server then. So some people will do command server /main.go. That's fine too. It's whatever you prefer. And then what I'm going to do in here, instead of copying our code, I'm actually going to use a snippet that I have. So this snippet just basically sets up our main to call this run function, and it's going to pass in any arguments, so command line arguments that we passed in whenever we ran this binary. And then it's going to pass in standard out as the second argument, which is just a writer that my run function can use to write debugging and type stuff to. I'm not actually utilizing it very well inside of this application, but if we ever were to like print things out randomly, like print out error messages or warnings or whatever, we could potentially write or pass that standard out to the rest of our application so it knows where to write stuff. And then later, if we didn't want to write it to standard out, we wanted to write it somewhere else, we could pass that to the rest of our application. So this is just kind of a template that I have. I think Matt Ryer has a blog post about it, so if you ever want to read it, I'll try to find a link and link it to it. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and use it. The other thing that I really like about it, though, is because the run function returns an error, it just makes it easier whenever you're writing the code inside of here that if you do have errors inside of your main code, you can just return that error. Okay, so inside of run, we want the code that we had in main.go. So basically this bit of code. So I'm going to go back to the server.go file, which I need to save. Paste this all in there. We're going to have two errors here. It's not going to know what post handler and file readers are. So to fix this, I'm going to first come back here and delete this main function. Then I'm going to scroll up here and rename this package to be gulb because I no longer want this to be my main package. And then I'm going to go back to the server.go and I'm going to name this gulb.filereader and gulb.posthandler. So now it knows it can pull these all from this gulb package that we have. And the last thing I want to do is rename this main.go. I'm going to rename this to, let's just call it post.go. I think that's fine for now. And yeah, that should have most of the stuff. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to add a way to query for all of these blog posts that we have. So just like we had the slug reader, I'm going to want some sort of interface that defines how we query for different things. And we don't necessarily have to start with an interface. Most of the time I don't. But in this case, I'm going to because it allows me to write the handlers and all that stuff before I write this implementation. But also because I know that long term I'm going to replace the implementation with a different implementation. So I'm just going to go ahead and prep us for that. So I'm going to call this a metadata querier, which is kind of a long, boring name, but that's not what I want that function to do. And inside of this, we're going to query. And it's going to return, let's return post metadata and an error. And then we need to define post metadata. So post metadata in this context is just going to be the metadata that's at the top of a blog post. So if you look at our blog post we have, this is that metadata. So we have title, description, date, and the author. So if I go back here, I know that I need to add all those. So I'm going to do slug string. This is the only thing that's not actually in that metadata, and that's because we're going to want it so we can link to different blog posts, and we can always derive the slug from the file name. So while it's not in the front matter of each blog post, it is something we can derive from the file name. All right, so then we have title, string, author, and we have an author type, I believe. I apologize, I'm typing poorly today. Then we're going to have a description, which is going to be a string, and we're going to have a date, which is a time.time. And then I want to go ahead and just add some toml struct tags so that we can parse that front matter and put it directly into the struct. So we're going to go add struct tags, or okay, yeah, that's the right one. And then I'm going to name this toml instead of JSON. I don't need that, and snake case is fine. And there we go. It's generated all of our toml struct tags. All right, so now that we have our metadata querier, it's not implemented, but we have a rough idea of what it's going to look like. I want to go ahead and start working on the handler. So we have a post handler here. I'm going to go ahead and just add this below it. I'm going to call func index handler. And this is going to take in a metadata querier and a template, which is going to be a template.template. And it's going to return an http.handlerfunc. Okay, so just like this function we had before, we're going to return a function that is our handler function. That's just a pattern that I tend to prefer. So I'm going to go ahead and return that. And then inside of this function, what are we doing? So the first thing we're going to do is query for posts. So we're going to say posts, comma, error is going to be metadata querier.query. And then we're going to say if error is not equal to nil. Inside of here, we can just, yeah, what the autocomplete gave me is fine. The http.error, I'm just say error querying the post and return. Otherwise, we want to render the template. And we could just go ahead and do something like error equals tpl.execute. This will be, sorry, we want to write to W, and then the data is going to be the posts. And then we can do if error is not equal to nil. Error executing template, that's fine. Otherwise, I think we are fine. I'm not actually going to keep this like this, though. While we could just send those posts in, I've found that I generally like to have a wrapping structure that sort of has all the posts in it in case I want to add other things to the index page or any template page I'm rendering, basically. But I also just like to have a struct type that defines all of the data that's going to be used. Like you'll see here, I have post data. This has all the data for a post, but also in the post handler, it's all the data we need for that. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to call this type index data. And this, if I probably explained this poorly, I like to do this a lot of the times, especially like small projects like this, because if I have a data type that actually defines all the data for each individual template, it's a lot easier to look at the template and look at that type and know what it's expecting. Whereas if I just start passing in data like this without defining a specific type, somebody might be like, okay, but like what data is expected to be passed into that template? And this is going to have posts, which is just going to be a slice of post metadata. And then to make this work up here, all we have to do is say data is going to be index data. Posts are going to be the posts. And then we'll pass data in here. So not really a huge change. All right, so now we're going to get to the actual, most of the work for this particular video, and that is implementing this metadata querier. So we have this function that's meant to query all of the metadata for all of our blog posts. I'm going to go ahead and just do this with a file reader. So I'm going to add a function to the file reader type. And I'm going to warn you that this is not going to be like the most performant version of this. We're not going to be caching anything. And every time somebody visits our index page, we're just going to look at every single markdown file that's on our hard drive and get all the metadata that way. So clearly not the best approach, but a good starting point for us. So I'm going to do file names, comma error is going to be filepath.glob, star.markdown. Now we're going to say if error is not equal to nil, return nil, fump.rf, querying for files. All right, so basically we're going to go ahead and just try to glob all the markdown files in our current directory that we're in. And if there's an error, we're going to return the error. Then we're going to create the post struct. We're going to range over those file names, and we're going to try to open each individual file and parse all its contents. And then if everything goes well, we're going to stick it into that posts. And then if all goes well, I need to do open file, read metadata, place into posts slice. And then if all that goes well and there's no errors, we're going to return posts, comma nil. Okay, so going back inside of our for loop, if there's an error, we want to return an error saying there was an error. We could potentially here opt to not do this. What I mean by this is that if we have to open 10 files and one of them errors, we might still want to render an index page. I'm just going to go ahead and just return an error now because I want to know about it because I'm developing this and trying to figure out why would that even happen. But in a real application, I could see some arguments for that in some cases. All right, so we're going to defer f.close. And this just makes sure we don't have any sort of memory leaks. We want to make sure any files we open get closed. All right, so now I'm going to do var post. Post is going to be a post metadata. And then I'm going to do front matter.parse. And this is going to be similar to what we did. Did we do this already? Somewhere in our post handler, I think. Yeah, here. You'll see here that we did the same type thing. We did front matter.parse, and we did a new strings reader with it. In this particular case, we don't have to do this because our file is already an io.reader, and we could actually fix the post handler a little bit. Right now, it's not a huge deal, but what happens right now is that we take a string and we turn it into a reader using the strings.newReader. But what makes that kind of silly is that if you look here at this file reader.read function, we are opening up a file, reading all the contents. So we already have an io.reader, and we're reading it into a string, and then passing the string, and then turning that string into another io.reader. So that's something we could potentially go back and refactor and change. And having this function return an io.reader or maybe a read closer instead would probably make more sense. But I think for now I'm just going to leave it be, and then we can come back and tweak it later. All right, going back to our query function, we are going to parse the front matter into this post, and then we're going to check for an error. So if the error is not equal to nil, I'm just going to go ahead and use GitHub Copilot to complete a lot of this for us so we don't have to do it. The last thing we need here is the slug. So I said that the slug is something that isn't in the front matter, but it's something we do have access to. So we're going to do post.slug is equal to strings.trim suffix file path base and file name. All right, so what is happening here? This file path.base is going to get the base file. So if we have a path like this is my file name.markdown, it's going to get rid of all the stuff in front of it, all the path stuff. So it would bring it down to just file name.markdown. And then trim suffix is going to take the results of this file path.base, and it's going to take off the suffix .md. So it's going to remove this .md at the end, and we'll just get file name. So for things like io.reader or ioreader.markdown, we're going to just get ioreader as the slug. And then finally, once we have that post, we're going to do post equals append posts in the post. This is where we parse this full post. Now we're going to add it to our post slice that we have up here that we're creating for the entire set of data. Okay, so if that all worked correctly, we should have most of our code. I think the only thing we're missing at this point is the template. So if you look here at well, there's two things. We're missing the template, but we're also missing the updates to our server to set up the routing. So going back here, let's go ahead and open post.go.html. I'm just going to save this file as index.go.html. And I'm going to say John's blog is the title. What else needs to change? So this bit here where we're rendering a specific blog post, I'm going to change this a little bit. I'm going to change the title to just be blog posts. And then I think this part here and this part here needs to get removed. And we're going to do something like ul class equals no class for now. I'll leave that there in case I need a class though. So we're doing unordered lists, and then we're going to range over the autocomplete is not very helpful right now, so we'll have to ignore it. Why do we have 3 backticks? That's not what I wanted. Here we're going to do href equals /post/ slug, because that is, I'll show this in a second. we come back here, the post metadata that we have, if we go look at it, one of the fields on this post metadata is a slug. So we're going to use that for linking to things. All right, so href goes there, and then we're going to go ahead and do class equals none for now. And then inside of this, we're going to do a list item. I'm going to do rounded large, BG white, border 2, border dashed, padding 4, and margin bottom 8. And then inside of this, h2, class equals text XL, font bold, and I don't want the date or the content, so I'm going to get rid of those two parts. I'm going to do p description, and then I'm going to close up the list item. All right, so I didn't want to waste a lot of time with this HTML. Basically, we're going to go through every single post, and we're going to create a link that uses the list item, and it's going to just render each one. All right, with all of that, let's go ahead and try to update not main.go, server.go now, and let's add this here so that we have it. I'm going to go ahead and just put this at, we'll do it at the bottom. We'll do index template is going to be template.must, template.parseFiles, index.go HTML, and I have a typo there. Parse files, there we go. I am really doing terrible at typing today. All right, so we have the index template. Now we're going to do mux.handlefunc. We'll do get slash, and this is going to be gulb.indexHandler, and we're going to pass in a file reader in the index template. And for these two, we could potentially pull them out into one declaration, which I think makes sense. Let's do post reader, and I'm going to replace both of these. And the reason I'm doing this is that in case I decide to tweak this a little bit, I can tweak it all in one place and not have two different file readers being used. But before I do any of that, I want to test this. So let's go run command server.go. And I probably should have, if I didn't test this earlier, I should have tested it after I refactored it just to make sure it works. Generally, when I'm refactoring, I like to test to make sure everything's working as expected before I make changes, so then I know that my changes are actually what caused the issue. In this case, I'm going to have to guess. All right, so post io.reader seems working, and post slash how to boil eggs seems to be working. And if we go to the home page, you'll see here that this is working. It's not, the HTML we had isn't perfect. Let me go ahead and, let's do margin bottom 8 here. And then let's stop and restart the server. How did we, I don't know what I just broke. Somehow I deleted that. I'm not really sure how, but okay. All right, that just added a little bit of padding there. All right, so we have how to boil eggs and goes io.reader. You can see here, these are both using the descriptions, and we can click in, and we can now see each individual blog post. So our blog is becoming a little bit more functional at this point, which is nice. Trying to decide if I want to do any of the refactoring that we could be doing. Actually, there's one thing I want to do. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do this now. We currently have all of our blog posts just in the root directory, which so far is not so bad. But imagine we had a readme.markdown and say, this is the readme that describes the Gulb project. Or maybe I'm just going to, let's just actually make a real readme. Gulb. Learning project that I am using to show how to build a blog from scratch. I don't really want to write a lot here, so I'm just going to go ahead and just do this. All right, so I have this here. I save it, and we have everything. Let's just say we happen to run this here. And this is just an example of one way this could happen. We'll come here, and you'll see this looks really weird, but if we click on it, this is showing our readme.markdown, which probably isn't something we wanted included here. So one of the things I like to do just to kind of make life a little bit easier is to make a specific directory that all of our blog posts are going to be in. So I'm just going to call this posts, and I'm going to move star.markdown into posts, and then you'll see here that our readme got moved in there, I'm sure. So I'm going to move that right back out. And now all of our posts are in here. But if I were to start the server right now, it's not going to work now. We're going to be missing all of our blog posts. So to fix that, I'm going to come back and I'm going to go to our post.go, and I'm looking for our file reader. And our file reader is now going to have a directory, and this is just going to be the directory that we are going to have all of our posts in. Directory to find blog posts in. So by default, it's going to be an empty string, so it's not actually going to do anything. But if we do want to set up a specific directory to look in, we can do that now. But we need to go ahead and change the rest of our code so it uses it. So I'm going to go ahead and say file path. I don't want to call it file path. We'll just do slug path is going to be file path join, and we're going to join fr.dir and slug plus markdown. I cannot. I'm doing this horribly. All right. And then once we have the slug path, we're going to open that. And then we're going to do the same thing down here for our query. We're going to go ahead and say dir path, or we'll just say posts path. It's going to be file path.join. And this isn't quite, actually that is right. So that's just going to get us the post path, and then we're going to glob on that path. So we can go ahead and just test this by stopping our server, restarting it, coming back here, and hopefully, actually I know why it's not working. If we go back to server.go, we never actually set this up. So we want to go ahead and say dir is going to be posts. And now when we start the server, it should look just in that post directory. There we go. So we didn't do a ton. I mean, we did get the index page working, but this should set us up nicely so that we can start looking at more complex stuff. Like one of the things I really want to do is I want to take our parser that we have. So if we go here into post, I want to go ahead and where's the post handler? I want to change this gulp mark to be able to parse custom HTML or custom markdown. I think I already showed you that inside of the IO reader with these asides. So we'll probably do that in the next lesson. And then the lesson after that, I'll probably start looking at ways of reading markdown files from other locations like GitHub or something. And we'll just start experimenting with different options and see what we end up liking and how we want to go ahead and do this. And the reason I'm not too worried about things like pagination or you'll notice that like I'm not caching any of the results. So like whenever we go to the index handler, I am not, let me find it here. I am not caching anything here. I just read all the files every single time somebody comes to this page. I'm not too worried about that now because long-term, I don't know how this is going to change. Maybe I'll decide to store these somewhere like a database or something. Maybe what I'll end up doing is, creating some other data structure. I could even see a situation where I generate the index page and, I make this into a static site generator instead. So there's a couple routes we could go. So I don't want to like lock myself into one of them right now. And for just verifying stuff works, I don't think it being slightly bad performance is going to be a big deal.